So, one thing I've started to notice about my channel over the past year is that I often find myself covering music that, while I do love it of course, most people who click the video will already know a majority of. Take the Mucore videos for example. They're fun to write, they pull a lot of views, so I definitely know you guys are actually watching them, but am I actually showing you guys music you've never heard before? Probably not. And that's really sad because I do feel like I'm in a unique position to expose people to songs and records that they wouldn't otherwise find. And so, I decided to start this series of random record recommendations where I show off and talk about music that I don't see folks talking about as much as they should, or at all in some cases. The goal here is, of course, not to flex some superficial, obscure taste muscle, because obviously some of my favorite records are also the most popular. But I really think it's part of my duty as a music channel to bring light to music that my viewers otherwise wouldn't come across. With all that said, welcome to the first episode in a new, hopefully monthly, series on this channel. There's no theme for this episode, maybe someday, but for now I've collected together 5 albums that will challenge your boundaries and give you a fresh sound for your palate. Let's begin. Up first, we've got the Queen of Africa herself, Yvonne Chaka. Yvonne's life story is absolutely fascinating and could definitely make up her own video. She was the first black child to ever appear on apartheid South African television in the early 80s, and ever since has led a life of political and human rights activism spanning all continents and issues. If that sounds even a little bit interesting to you, I highly suggest you look into her history, but what I'm here to talk about today is her second studio album, Sangoma. This is one of the most fun pop albums I've heard in recent years, blending bubblegum and synth pop styling seamlessly into this awesome, catchy, and consistently joyous sequence of bop after bop. The production is very of its time, but in that ageless 80s sense where no matter how old it gets, it will never really age poorly. The real star of the show, though, is obviously Yvonne's voice. It's no wonder she's a star in her region, even going so far as to share the stage with the likes of Bono and Queen. Her voice is the definition of a showstopper, with an effortlessly captivating belt and sweet growl to parts of her range. She grabs your attention and refuses to let go anytime she's on the mic. Combine that with excellent song and hook writing, and you've got all the ingredients for a classic on your hands. I kind of obsessed over this album for a day or two, listening to it well over half a dozen times, and I must say, the catchiness of these tunes is just undeniable, be it the breathy, fun sweetness of Stimela, or the righteous anger of Save Me. All of it is memorable after just 1 or 2 listens, and while none of them are overly groundbreaking, the arrangements and energy have just the right amount of unique flair to make this a standout release. Also, a few words on the version of this which is on Spotify, because wow, it's messed up. The tracks are all mislabeled minus the first 2. It's a really crappy vinyl rip, you can tell there's dust on the stylus, and it's missing Private Lover, which is easily my favorite song there. There's versions of the record around YouTube to listen to instead, I'll link them in the description, but just be really wary of the one on streaming, it's not good at all. Going off in a totally different direction, let's look at this absolutely unhinged, dark ambient, industrial, post-punk, amorphous blob thing from Japan. Describing this EP is really difficult, as it encapsulates so many sounds, so many moods, that I would be worried to leave things about it out. Despite only being 3 tracks and containing so many drones throughout, there's a subtle variety to it that keeps me so consistently enraptured with it. The clear star of the show is the 12-minute Orgasmusic, a long and winding dive into what feels like the depths of human suffering in all of its beauty and terror. This yelping and yowling vocal acts as our tour guide into despair, delving deeper and deeper into darkness with these synthetic choirs sounding far more like a wind howling around the listener like a vortex, underpinned by muffled bass and even more muffled industrial drumming. Other inclusions like violin, radio samples, brief harsh noise, and dogs barking all make up the journey through one of the most spine-chilling things I've ever listened to, and what is honestly one of the greatest songs I think I've ever heard. The following two tracks are far shorter, at 3 minutes each, and while they both share the same muffled production as the opener, they more closely follow the industrial formula, with jagged guitars, more rhythmic vocals, and the same gloomy sense of dread, feeling trapped in the constraints of a stable drum rhythm. While the opener felt vast and endless, the remaining songs feel claustrophobic and anxious to a staggering degree, with sharp and aggressive guitars piercing through the mix, and more ominous low vocals giving it all this feeling of true rock bottom. This is not only one of the best obscure records I've heard in a while, it's probably up there with some of my favorite albums of all time. Definitely give it a good listen if you can stomach it. You won't be disappointed. When I think about early electronic music, my mind tends to lean towards the 70s when it comes to the good stuff. Obviously, there was music leading up to that helped bring the technology to where it is. Kraftwerk didn't invent the synthesizers they made their masterpieces on, but in terms of the great classic electronic music, the earliest I would think to go is probably the late 60s with Wendy Carlos's work. But what if I told you there was a purely electronic album that predates all of that by over a decade? What if I told you that one of the best electronic music albums I have ever heard was released in not 1978 or 1968, but 1958? Prélude au sommeil by Jean-Jacques Perrey is something to marvel at, not just because of the technology that created it — it was definitely not the first electronic album after all — but because of the fact that it understands the power of synthesizers in composition. Basically all of the 50s and 60s electronic music I've listened to has boiled down to tech demos, something to show off how far the hardware has come and what it's capable of, but very little of it holds the kind of aesthetic value that more contemporary electronic of today has. Prélude au sommeil acts as not only a fantastic technological artifact, but as a piece of wholly unique art. The machinery seems to bend and sigh under the weight of its own creation as it belts and whispers tones unheard before in music, and Perrey, as the master of his tool, shapes that sound and those tones into what may well be the first drone or ambient record. Color radiates from the sounds as both musician and instrument seem on the verge of collapsing under their ambition, but each time triumphantly pulling through with confidence and vigor. There's nothing like this album, and if you, like me, are in desperate need of more interesting music from the 50s, there is simply none better than this in my eyes. I've long been an avid defender, nay proponent, of Farrah Abraham's My Teenage Dream Ended. I think it's a hidden masterpiece of outsider music and the progenitor to hyperpop and PC music in ways that could only come from someone with a lot of passion to put out and not a lot of musical talent to put in. That's the key element of outsider music and art in general, artists who possess little or no traditional experience or talent in their medium, but through either determination or naivety decide to create anyways. The results, while rarely good by technical metrics, are always interesting and work to unintentionally challenge the listener's expectations of what good music is. Now, let's talk about children in music. As someone who's been playing music for most of my life and who has worked with children for many years, it's always been frustrating to me seeing the way that children in any art form are treated, and music in particular. It feels like you're either a child prodigy, innately excellent at meeting the expectations for what good art should be, or you're told to keep trying and someday maybe you'll make something good, pushing you in line with traditionalist expectations for quality. That brings me to this album, Stardust, which, as is proudly proclaimed on the poorly scanned cover, was entirely recorded by 4 girls aged 10 to 12. Little is known about the recording process, naturally, but it is amateurish to say the least, with the four girls crooning all together, often atonally, over some truly bizarre, minimal, trip-hop-ish sampled beats. The product is a constant sense of either discomfort or endearment. There's not a single shred of irony here, and if you really let it have your ears on its own terms, it's easy to get brought into the world of preteen awkwardness and trivial drama. For as flawed as the performances naturally are, I often find myself drawing comparisons with some of the biggest alternative pop and indie stars of the time, like Fiona Apple and Tori Amos, artists who have excellent singing voices, but also understand the value of letting go of that for the sake of the song's narrative and aesthetic. That's the word here, aesthetic, and whether or not it's intentional really doesn't matter to me because it provides an experience so wholly unique and so impossible to replicate. There's just nothing like it. I want to try, with this series, to always include at least one current year project so that you can be sure to support artists who can still benefit from your attention. And going into a completely different direction from the last album we talked about, I want to recommend you all check out the new album by Glasgow avant-garde metal band Ashenspire, Hostile Architecture. I don't know if a single other album this year has grown on me as much from listen to listen as this one. Initially, I had a lot of things I enjoyed about it, but also some reservations I wasn't quite able to pin down. A lot of that had to do, I think, with my own expectations that this would be in any way similar to Imperial Triumphant's record this year. Expectations that were immediately proven wrong, leaving me kind of lost as to how I should process the album. As I listened on, however, the true soul of the project started to reveal itself to me, and when I decided to give it another go, I was glad to find that I'd really missed the true magic here. The biggest selling point of the record for me is also the one I was initially so skeptical about, which is the vocal delivery. It's not so much sung, nor is it growled or screamed, it's just this Glasgow guy angrily yelling, and upon first listen, I really didn't know if I could get behind it. It was only in the last leg where it started to click, and I started to understand the value of having the vocals so unobscured. Take the gargantuan climax to the opening song, which contains not only the greatest bit of musical tension and release since Godspeed's last record, but also brings some of the most angry and desperate vocal delivery I've heard in the genre. The screaming refrain of always 3 months to the gutter, never 3 months to the top, makes a mission statement for the whole record about the politics of poverty and the intentionality with which capitalism ignores its most vulnerable subjects. The desperation is real and brings to light the depraved conditions that the system creates intentionally. The music is also just phenomenal, giving me lots of hints of Black Country New Road and Godspeed in their instrument choices and their tension release dynamic. Some of the best post-rock moments of the year show up here, and with the wailing saxophones and the beautiful violins taking just as core a place as the traditional metal guitars and drums, the composition borders on neoclassical, taking influences from music far older than metal to create this real and palpable sense of scale and importance of the issue. Hostile Architecture is a record you'll hear me talk about again at the end of the year, no question. It's a masterpiece of avant-garde and progressive metal, and a timely political cry that refuses to be ignored. Support these guys as much as you can because they more than deserve it. And that's it. These are 5 albums that you should definitely check out if you want to expand your horizons or find things that you've almost certainly never heard of before. This is a super fun format for me, so let me know what you think of it, and let me know if you listen to any of the records and enjoy them. Shout out, as always, to my patrons. Hopefully the quick turnaround can make up for the long time I was gone. I've got more in store for you soon, so keep an eye out. You'll hear from me soon.